Welcome. Tonight we retreat from the modern world and step back through the heavy, frosted curtains of time. We journey to a place of stone and timber, where the air is thick with the history of 1,000 quiet winters. Imagine, if you will, a landscape draped in a heavy, unrelenting blanket of white. The year is unimportant. What matters is the stillness. We find ourselves at the edge of a distant frontier, perhaps along the northern reaches of a great empire, where a long, low-slung stone barrack sits nestled against the earth like a sleeping giant. Outside, the wind is a low, mournful hum, a distant cello note that vibrates against the thick masonry, but inside the world is small, enclosed, and safe. Here, there is no rush. There is no urgency. There is only the slow, rhythmic pulse of a winter's night, the steady drip of melting frost, and the pervasive, comforting weight of the air. As you settle into your own bed, feel the boundaries of your room dissolve into the sturdy, soot-stained walls of the barrack. You are safe. You are warm. You are part of the quietude. The stone of the barrack walls is a marvel of mundane permanence. Each block was hewn from a nearby quarry, hand-carved with slow, deliberate strikes of a heavy iron chisel. If you were to run your fingers across the surface of the wall nearest to you, you would feel the cooling grit of the sandstone, the minute ridges and valleys left behind by a craftsman who lived centuries ago. The stone is cold to the touch, yet it serves as a formidable barrier against the biting teeth of the gale outside. In the corners of the room, where the walls meet the timber-framed ceiling, a faint glint of frost has crystallized in the mortar, a delicate, intricate lace of ice that remains frozen, undisturbed by the gentle warmth of the indoor fires. This frost is a silent witness to the season, a tiny, glittering map of the cold that presses against the exterior. Within these walls, however, the atmosphere is heavy and stagnant in a way that feels like a physical embrace. It is a dense, humid air, seasoned by the breath of many and the slow combustion of the hearth. The primary character of this room, the very soul of its atmosphere, is the scent. It is the unmistakable, heavy aroma of wet wool. Imagine a row of heavy cloaks, thick tunics, and woolen leg wraps hanging from iron pegs along the walls. They have spent the day absorbing the dampness of the falling snow and the mist of the moorlands. Now, as they hang in the vicinity of the central braziers, the moisture is being slowly coaxed from the fibers by the rising heat. This is not a sharp or unpleasant smell. Rather, it is deep, earthy, and profoundly grounding. It is the scent of lanolin, of ancient sheep shearing, of looms clicking in the dim light of village huts. It carries the essence of the outdoors, the mineral scent of rain and the sharp tang of pine needles, muffled and softened by the warmth of the indoors. To breathe it in is to feel the weight of the fabric itself. Each fiber of the wool is swollen with water, and as the steam rises invisibly into the rafters, the air becomes a thick, tactile blanket that settles over your skin. Listen to the sound of the wool as it dries. It is a sound so subtle it exists at the very edge of perception. It is the microscopic shift of fibers settling, the occasional soft thud as a heavy cloak shifts on its peg, weighted down by the lingering dampness. Below the cloaks, the floor is a mosaic of packed earth and smooth river stones. In the dim light, the stones shimmer with a faint, oily sheen, reflecting the orange glow of the embers. Each stone has been trodden flat by the passage of countless leather-soled boots. The sound of a footstep here is a dull, muffled thud, a sound that does not echo but is immediately absorbed by the thatch and the heavy fabrics. The silence of the barrack is not a hollow silence. It is a full, textured silence, comprised of 1,000 tiny domestic noises. The light in the barrack is a living thing. In the center of the long room, a series of bronze braziers hold a slow-burning mixture of peat and hardwood. The flames do not roar. They whisper. They are small, flickering tongues of amber and gold that lick at the edges of the fuel. The peat glows with a deep, visceral crimson, a heat that feels as though it comes from the very center of the earth. As the fuel settles, it makes a tiny, crystalline clink, a sound like breaking glass, as a glowing coal fractures and releases a fresh puff of silver smoke. This smoke does not sting the eyes. It has been filtered through the high rafters, leaving only a faint, sweet trail of wood smoke that mingles with the scent of the wet wool. The shadows on the walls are long and soft. They dance with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, stretching toward the ceiling before receding back into the corners. There are no sharp edges in this light. Everything, the wooden beams, the stacked shields, the ceramic bowls, is softened, its outlines blurred by the amber haze. Along the sides of the room are the sleeping platforms. They are simple structures of sturdy oak, raised just slightly off the floor. Each platform is covered with a thick layer of dried heather and straw, which rustles with a dry, papery sound whenever a sleeper moves. Over the straw are laid the furs, heavy pelts of deer and bear, their hair thick and coarse, providing a layer of insulation that no modern fabric could replicate. When you lie back onto such a surface, the straw compresses with a rhythmic crunch, shaping itself to the contours of your body. The fur is warm, holding the heat of the room within its dense pile. Above you, the ceiling is a forest of darkened timber. The beams are blackened by years of smoke, polished to a dull sheen by the rising heat. You can trace the grain of the wood with your eyes, following the whorls and knots that tell the story of a tree that grew long before the barrack was ever built. In this space, time has a different quality. It does not march forward, it circles slowly like a hawk on a thermal. There is a sense of immense, unhurried preparation. In the corner of the room, a single man sits on a low stool. He is not a warrior in this moment, but a craftsman of the mundane. He is cleaning a set of iron scales. You can hear the rhythmic scritch-scritch of a piece of pumice stone against the metal. It is a repetitive, monotonous sound, as steady as a heartbeat. He moves with a slow, deliberate economy of motion. He picks up a scale, inspects it in the firelight, rubs it with a fragment of oiled cloth and sets it down. The clink of the metal against the wooden table is soft, a bright note in the heavy atmosphere. He does not speak. There is no need for words. The work is the meditation. The maintenance of the tools is the ritual that keeps the winter at bay. Outside, the snow continues to fall. It is a heavy, wet snow, the kind that clings to every surface, turning the world into a monochrome study of silence. You can imagine the way it piles up against the door, a thick, oaken portal reinforced with bands of hammered iron. The door is slightly swollen from the humidity, fitting tightly into its frame, sealing the warmth inside. Occasionally, a stray gust of wind finds a microscopic gap in the stonework, producing a tiny, high-pitched whistle that quickly fades away, smothered by the thickness of the walls. This sound only serves to emphasize the profound safety of the interior. The cold is a distant concept, an abstract idea that has no power here. In the bunks around you, the other inhabitants of the barrack are settled. Their presence is felt through the collective rhythm of their breathing. It is a slow, oceanic sound, the rise and fall of dozens of chests in unison. It is the sound of a community at rest. There is an occasional soft murmur, a half-spoken word from a dream, or the rustle of a woolen blanket being pulled higher against the chin. These sounds are not disruptions. They are part of the texture of the night. They are the evidence of life continuing in its most basic, peaceful form. The smell of the wet wool is stronger now, as the heat from the braziers reaches its peak. It is a humid, heavy scent that seems to coat the back of your throat with a sense of satiety. It is the smell of a task completed, of a day's work done, of the transition from the harshness of the elements to the sanctuary of the hearth. As you lie there, focus on the sensation of your own breathing. Feel the way the cool air from the shadows enters your lungs and how it leaves your body as a warm, invisible mist. Your breath joins the collective mist of the room. You are part of this ancient, slow-moving history. The darkness is not empty. It is filled with the presence of the stone, the wood, and the wool. The light from the braziers is dimming now, the bright oranges fading into deep, resonant purples and charred blacks. The world is narrowing down to the space immediately around you, the texture of the blanket against your cheek, the sound of the wind, and the heavy, comforting scent of the damp fabric. There is nothing you need to do. There is nowhere you need to go. The winter will continue outside, but here in the heart of the barrack, everything is still. Everything is quiet. Everything is as it should be. The grain in the sacks in the corner is counted. The oil in the lamps is sufficient. The fire will last until the gray dawn. For now, there is only the slow, rhythmic passage of the night and the deep, hypnotic peace of the winter barracks. You feel your eyelids growing heavy, weighted down by the density of the air and the monotony of the shadows. The sound of the pumice stone has stopped. The craftsman has retired. The only sound left is the heartbeat of the building itself, the slow expansion and contraction of the stone in the cold, and the gentle, persistent hiss of the dying embers. You are drifting now, sinking into the layers of wool and fur, becoming one with the silence. The smell of the wet wool is the last thing you notice, a grounding, ancient scent that pulls you down into a deep, dreamless sleep. The barracks are quiet. The world is at rest. You are safe. You are warm. You are home. The night deepens, and within the thick stone walls of the barrack, the air settles into a heavy, rhythmic stillness. There is no moon visible through the narrow, slit-like windows high above, only the relentless, swirling darkness of the winter storm. Yet inside, the darkness is of a different quality. It is a warm, velvet blackness, punctuated only by the dying orange pulse of the central braziers and the tiny, singular flame of an oil lamp sitting on a low wooden crate. Let us focus our attention on that lamp. It is a simple vessel of unglazed terracotta, its surface rough and cool to the touch, shaped by the steady hands of a potter in a sun-drenched valley far to the south. The oil within is thick and golden, perhaps pressed from the last harvest of olives or rendered from the fat of the winter's livestock. The wick, a braided strand of coarse linen, draws the oil upward with a slow, invisible patience. The flame it produces is no larger than a fingernail, a soft, teardrop-shaped amber glow that wavers slightly in the imperceptible drafts of the room. As the flame flickers, it casts a long, trembling shadow of a nearby stack of grain sacks against the wall. These sacks are made of heavy, double-stitched burlap, a fabric that feels abrasive and dry against the skin. If you were to lean against one, you would hear the muffled, musical shift of thousands of dried grains, barley or rye, settling into the crevices of the weave. The sound is like a very soft, very slow rain falling on a thatched roof. Each grain is a tiny, hard teardrop of stored summer sunlight, waiting for the spring that feels so impossibly distant. The smell of the burlap is dusty and earthy, a dry counterpoint to the pervasive, humid scent of the wet wool drying near the fires. It is the smell of the barn, of the harvest, of the cycle of the seasons that continues regardless of the frost that now grips the world outside. Beside the grain sacks sits a row of ceramic jars, their lids sealed with wax and bound with twine. These jars hold the lifeblood of the barracks' winter survival: salted meats, pickled vegetables, and jars of thick, dark honey. The jars are cool, their glazed surfaces reflecting the amber light of the oil lamp in long, distorted streaks. Occasionally, the wood of the crates they sit upon groans, a slow, deep protest as the timber contracts in the cooling air. This sound is a solitary note in the symphony of the night, a reminder of the living nature of the materials that surround us. The wood is oak, seasoned by years of use, its grain deep and dark, polished by the friction of hands and tools until it feels as smooth as bone. Let your mind drift to the corner of the room where a single soldier is seated on the edge of his bunk. He is not preparing for battle. He is engaged in the most peaceful of tasks, the mending of a tunic. The garment is made of the same heavy, dense wool that characterizes the atmosphere of the room. It is a deep indigo, though in this light it appears as a shade of midnight. He holds a needle of polished bone, its point sharp and gleaming. Watch the slow, repetitive motion of his hand. He pushes the needle through the thick fabric, the sound of faint, rhythmic thush as the bone pierces the fibers. He pulls the thread, a strand of waxed sinew, slowly and steadily, ensuring the tension is perfect. The thread hums as it slides through the wool. This is a task that cannot be rushed. It requires a quiet, focused mind. It is a meditation in movement. Each stitch is a small victory against the wear and tear of time, a quiet reinforcement of the world he inhabits. The smell of the wet wool is particularly strong near him, as his damp cloak hangs just inches away on a peg. The steam rises from it in almost invisible ribbons, carrying with it the scent of the moorland, the mineral tang of wet granite, and the faint, sweet decay of winter heather. This scent mingles with the smell of the beeswax he uses to coat his thread, a clean, honeyed aroma that cuts through the heavier smells of the barrack. The humidity in the air makes the wool feel heavy and soft, its texture becoming more pronounced as it absorbs the warmth. It is a tactile world, one defined by the weight of the blankets and the sturdiness of the stone. Now consider the floor beneath his feet. It is composed of large, flat flagstones, each one irregular in shape but fitted together with the precision of long-standing tradition. The stones are dark, almost black, and they hold the cold of the earth deep within their core. However, near the braziers, the stones have absorbed the heat, radiating a gentle, subterranean warmth that can be felt even through the thick leather soles of a boot. Between the stones, the mortar has been worn away in places, filled instead with the fine gray dust of the hearth and the occasional stray bit of straw. If you were to walk across this floor, the sound would be a sequence of dull, heavy thuds, each step echoing the permanence of the structure. The floor does not yield, it supports. It is the foundation of this small, enclosed universe. Beyond the circle of the oil lamp, the rest of the barrack is a study in shadow and soft sound. The breathing of the men in their bunks has reached a steady, collective cadence. It is a low, rolling sound, like the distant tide hitting a sandy shore. One man turns in his sleep, the straw of his mattress rustling with a dry, papery whisper that lasts for several seconds before settling back into silence. The straw is fresh, brought in before the first snows, and it retains the scent of the fields, a light, herbal fragrance that provides a delicate top note to the deeper, muskier smells of the room. The fur blankets that cover the sleepers are heavy and dense. They are the pelts of wolves and bears, their hair coarse and thick, providing a barrier of warmth that is nearly impenetrable. Underneath these furs, the body heat of the sleepers is trapped, creating small, private microclimates of comfort amidst the vast, cold stone of the barrack. High above, the rafters are lost in the gloom. The roof is a complex architecture of beams and purlins, held together by wooden pegs and iron bolts. Over the centuries, the smoke from the fires has coated the wood in a fine layer of soot, turning it into a dark, protective skin. In the very peak of the roof, there is a small ventilation hole, through which a tiny amount of the heavy air escapes. If you were to look up, you might see a single, distant star through the gap, a cold diamond in the black sky, but it is quickly obscured by the swirling snow. The wind howls across the opening, a low, hollow whistle that sounds like a flute played at a great distance. This sound does not threaten. It only serves to emphasize the thickness of the thatch and the strength of the timber. Inside, the air remains still, protected and heavy. Let us return to the scent of the wet wool. It is the dominant sensory experience of this hour. It is the smell of protection. In this era, wool is the primary defense against the elements. It is the fabric of life. As it dries, it releases the lanolin, a natural oil that has a faint, animal musk, reminding the inhabitants of the living creatures that provided the warmth. The wool is scratchy to the touch when dry, but when damp and warm, it becomes supple and heavy. It drapes over the wooden pegs in thick, sculptural folds, the shadows in the creases as deep as the shadows in the corners of the room. There is a sense of immense weight to these garments, the weight of tradition, the weight of necessity, and the weight of the winter itself. In the corner, a water butt sits beneath a slow-dripping leak in the roof. The sound is a rhythmic plink, 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 as a single drop of melted snow falls from a beam into the dark water below. The interval between the drops is perfectly consistent, a natural metronome that marks the passage of the night. Each drop creates a series of tiny, concentric ripples that expand outward, hitting the sides of the wooden barrel with a faint, hollow ring. This sound is incredibly focused and clear in the quiet of the barrack. It is a reminder of the world outside melting away, of the slow transition of ice back into liquid, a process that happens at its own unhurried pace. The man mending his tunic finally stops. He sets the bone needle down on a small wooden tray with a soft clack. He smooths the fabric with his hands, his palms rasping slightly against the wool. He then folds the garment with slow, deliberate precision, pressing the air out of the folds. He places it at the foot of his bunk, next to his boots. The boots are made of thick, dark leather, oiled with fish fat to keep out the moisture. They bear the marks of long marches and heavy labor, their toes scuffed but their structure still sound. He takes a moment to look at the oil lamp. The flame is lower now, the oil having been slowly consumed by the steady pull of the wick. He does not extinguish it yet. He sits for a moment in the silence, his hands resting on his knees. In this moment of stillness, the barrack feels like a ship at sea, navigating the vast, frozen ocean of the winter night. The walls are the hull, the rafters the masts, and the men within are the crew, bound together by the shared necessity of warmth and rest. There is no ambition here tonight. There is no conflict. There is only the preservation of the self and the maintenance of the environment. The air is so thick with the smell of the wool and the smoke that it feels as though you could reach out and touch it. It is a comforting density, a physical manifestation of the safety of the interior. The shadows continue their slow, hypnotic dance. A log in the brazier shifts, settling into the gray ash with a soft, crumbling sound. A few sparks rise, swirling in the draft before winking out in the darkness of the rafters. The heat is consistent, a low, thrumming warmth that radiates from the center of the room and pools in the low areas near the bunks. It is the kind of heat that makes the limbs feel heavy and the mind feel slow. It is the heat of deep winter, intended for nothing more than the quiet passage of time. The man finally leans forward and blows gently on the oil lamp. The flame stretches, turns blue at the base, and then vanishes, leaving behind a thin, curling ribbon of white smoke that smells of charred linen and warm oil. Now the only light is the dull, subterranean glow of the embers. The room is transformed. The shapes of the sacks and the jars become mere suggestions in the gloom. The texture of the walls is felt rather than seen. The smell of the wet wool remains, a constant, grounding presence in the dark. The man climbs into his bunk, the straw singing its dry, rustling song as it accepts his weight. He pulls the heavy fur blanket up to his chin, the coarse hair tickling his skin. He exhales a long, slow breath, a white mist that is invisible in the dark but felt in the humidity of the air. The barrack is now fully committed to the night. The plink, plink of the water drop continues. The wind continues its distant, mournful song. The rhythmic breathing of the room's inhabitants creates a soft, white noise that masks the smaller sounds of the building's settling. You are there with them, tucked into the layers of wool and fur, the heavy scent of the damp fabric acting as a tether to the physical world. The world is small. The world is safe. The world is incredibly, beautifully boring. Your eyes are closed now, the darkness of the room matching the darkness behind your eyelids. There is nothing left to see, nothing left to do but to listen to the slow, steady heartbeat of the winter barracks and drift down into the deep, heavy sleep of the ancient world. The wool is warm. The stone is thick. The night is long. Sleep now. Sleep. The midnight hour has arrived, and the interior of the barrack has transitioned into a state of profound, heavy equilibrium. The initial dampness that accompanied the soldiers entering from the storm has now fully permeated the air, creating a microclimate that is thick, humid, and remarkably still. The scent of wet wool, once a sharp and immediate sensation, has now matured into a deep, foundational aroma that seems to have soaked into the very mortar of the stone walls. It is an ancient smell, one that speaks of endurance and the slow passage of time. If you were to look closely at one of the heavy woolen tunics hanging near the central hearth, you would see the way the individual fibers, coarse, hand-spun and dyed with the muted pigments of the earth, have swollen with the moisture. Each tiny strand of wool is a miniature reservoir of the day's sleet, now gradually surrendering its burden to the warmth of the room. The steam rising from these garments is not visible as a cloud, but rather as a shimmering distortion in the air, a ghost-like movement that blurs the sharp lines of the wooden pegs and the rough-hewn stone behind them. In the center of the room, the braziers continue their slow, rhythmic consumption of the fuel. Let us observe the nature of the ash that has begun to accumulate around the glowing cores of the peat blocks. The ash is a delicate, powdery gray, lighter than the finest flour, and it settles in soft, undulating drifts within the iron basins. Occasionally, a microscopic current of air, perhaps caused by the movement of a sleeper or a distant draft from the heavy oak door, disturbs the surface of this ash. It rises in a silent, swirling dance, a galaxy of gray motes that catch the dying amber light before settling back down into the stillness. The sound of the burning peat is a low, continuous hiss, punctuated every few minutes by a soft crackle, a tiny explosion of a trapped air pocket within the ancient, compressed vegetation. It is a sound that does not startle, but rather reinforces the silence, a gentle reminder of the heat that stands as a wall between the inhabitants and the freezing dark of the exterior. Near the hearth, there is a low wooden table, its surface scarred by years of use and polished to a dull glow by the constant friction of leather and cloth. Upon this table sits a large ceramic bowl filled with water for the night. The water is still, a dark mirror reflecting the blackened rafters above. A single dust mote floats on the surface, caught in the surface tension, anchored in the center of a series of invisible ripples. Beside the bowl lies a wooden ladle, carved from a single piece of apple wood. The grain of the wood is tight and swirling, a testament to the slow growth of the tree in a colder climate. If you were to lift this ladle, you would feel its surprising weight, the balance of the handle, and the smooth, cool texture of the bowl. The wood has been seasoned by countless dips into water and broth, absorbing the oils of the kitchen and the mineral essence of the well. It is a simple tool, yet in this moment of absolute quiet, it possesses a quiet dignity, a physical manifestation of the necessity of hydration and the order of the daily routine. Further down the length of the barrack, the shadows deepen, stretching away from the central light sources to gather in the corners and under the sleeping platforms. These platforms, constructed from thick planks of pine, have begun to hum with the collective warmth of the men. The straw mattresses beneath the fur blankets are deep and densely packed. Imagine the individual stalks of straw, golden, hollow, and brittle. Under the weight of a resting body, these stalks compress and shift, creating a dry, rustling sound that is the very definition of a boring acoustic landscape. It is a sound that lacks any sharp edges, a soft, papery friction that fills the gaps between breaths. The men are buried deep within their bedding, their forms indistinguishable from the mounds of wool and fur. The only sign of their presence is the occasional, slow movement of a limb, or the deep, rhythmic sigh of a sleeper descending into a deeper stage of rest. The walls themselves seem to be breathing. The stone, though cold and immovable, is a porous material that interacts with the humidity of the room. In the dim light, you can see where the moisture has condensed into tiny, jewel-like droplets on the smoother faces of the granite blocks. These droplets do not fall. They cling to the stone, growing slowly as they draw more water from the heavy air. They are like a slow-motion rain, a subterranean weather system occurring within the safety of the barracks. The mortar between the stones, a mixture of lime, sand, and perhaps a bit of animal hair for binding, is a lighter shade of gray, providing a grid-like pattern that leads the eye upward toward the darkness of the roof. The height of the ceiling is a mystery in this light, a vast, shadowy cavern where the smoke from the braziers pools and swirls before finding its way out through the distant thatch. Let us focus on the tactile sensation of the air itself. It feels heavy on the skin, a warm, damp pressure that encourages the muscles to relax and the heart rate to slow. It is the opposite of the sharp, biting air of the high hills. Here, every breath is an effortless intake of warmth. The humidity carries with it the faint, metallic tang of the iron braziers and the deep, resinous scent of the pine logs stacked near the door. The logs are still covered in their rough, craggy bark, and in the warmth of the room, the sap has begun to soften, releasing a scent that is both sharp and comforting. The smell of the forest brought indoors to serve the needs of the hearth. In one of the bunks, a man is partially awake, though his eyes remain closed. He is focused on the sensation of the woolen blanket against his chin. The wool is heavy, a dense weave that provides a comforting pressure, like a steady hand resting on his chest. He can feel the individual loops of the yarn, the slight prickle of the fibers that haven't been fully softened by use. It is a grounding sensation, a physical tether that keeps him anchored in the present moment. He listens to the sound of the wind outside. It has changed in pitch, moving from a low roar to a high, thin whistle as it cuts across the sharp angles of the stone chimney. To him, the sound is a lullaby, a confirmation of the thickness of the walls and the security of his position. He is not needed for the watch. He is not needed for the morning's labor yet. His only responsibility is to remain still, to allow the warmth to seep into his bones, and to listen to the slow, monotonous heartbeat of the barrack. The sound of the water drop plink, plink, continues its tireless count of the seconds. It is a sound that has no beginning and no end, a constant in an environment where everything else is slow and changing. The water in the butt is cold, a stark contrast to the humid air, and the sound it makes is crisp and clean. It cuts through the muddled, heavy sounds of the breathing and the rustling straw, providing a focal point for the mind. If you follow the sound, you can imagine the journey of that single drop, starting as a snowflake on the thatch, melting under the influence of the rising heat from the braziers, seeping through the layers of straw and reed, clinging to the underside of a blackened oak beam, and finally surrendering to gravity. It is a long, slow journey, a journey of transition from the chaotic world of the storm to the structured world of the interior. Near the back of the barrack, the supply of leather equipment is neatly arranged. There are saddles, harnesses, and bundles of spare straps, all made of thick, vegetable-tanned hide. In the humidity, the leather has lost its rigidity, becoming supple and soft. The smell of the leather is a deep, rich undertone to the wet wool, a scent of oak bark and animal oils. One of the straps has a buckle made of cast bronze, and in the low light, the metal has a dull, greenish-gold luster. The buckle is cold, a tiny island of chill in the surrounding warmth. The way the light catches the edge of the metal is the only sharp thing in the room, a singular point of focus in a world of blurred edges and soft shadows. As the night progresses, the very concept of time seems to dissolve. There is no clock here, only the consumption of fuel and the gradual drying of the wool. The barrack is a vessel, drifting through the dark sea of the winter night, and its occupants are all participants in a shared, silent meditation. The monotony is the point. The lack of conflict is the goal. Every detail, the texture of the stone, the scent of the peat, the sound of the straw, is a layer of insulation, wrapping the mind in a protective cocoon of boredom. You are part of this stillness. Your breathing has synchronized with the collective rhythm of the room. You can feel the weight of the years, the weight of the stone, and the weight of the wool pressing down on you, not as a burden, but as a comfort. The embers in the nearest brazier shift again. A small mountain of gray ash collapses, revealing a fresh, glowing heart of intense crimson. For a few moments, the light in the immediate area becomes a bit brighter, casting a soft, red glow over the floor and the base of the nearest bunk. You can see the fine grain of the dust on the floorboards, the way it has gathered in the grooves of the wood. Then, as a new layer of ash begins to form, the glow recedes, returning the room to its state of amber-tinted twilight. The cycle of the fire is the cycle of the night, a slow, predictable movement from light to dark, from heat to cold and back again. The man in the bunk finally drifts back into a full sleep, his mind let go of the sensation of the wool and the sound of the wind. He is now just another silent presence in the long room, a single note in the quiet symphony of the barracks. The air continues to circulate in slow, lazy loops, carrying the scent of the wet wool to every corner, ensuring that the entire space is unified by this one pervasive aroma. It is the smell of a winter lived well, a winter survived through the simple, repetitive acts of maintenance and rest. The storm may rage outside, but here, under the heavy beams and behind the thick stone, there is only the peace of the mundane. The world is quiet. The fire is steady. The wool is drying. You are drifting deeper now, the sounds of the barrack becoming a distant, indistinct hum, a background noise to the vast, empty space of your own rest. The night is long, and there is nothing but the slow, hypnotic passage of time to mark its progress. Sleep is the only task left. The hour has arrived when the night is at its most profound and heavy, a time often referred to by the ancients as the dead of night. Though here, within the sturdy embrace of the barracks, it feels more like the night is simply breathing in a deep, undisturbed slumber. The clock, if one could call it that, is marked not by the ticking of gears, but by the gradual, inevitable descent of the logs in the braziers and the slow migration of shadows across the textured stone floor. We are now in that window of time where the world outside has ceased to exist in any meaningful way. There is only this room, this warmth, and the rhythmic, low-frequency hum of a dozen men resting in unison. The air is even thicker now, saturated with the essence of the drying wool, a scent that has become so much a part of the atmosphere that it is no longer noticed as a separate entity, but rather felt as a weight upon the skin, a comforting, humid pressure that signals total safety. In the center of the long room, the duty of the night watch falls to a single individual. In many stories, the watchman is a figure of tension, alert for the sounds of an approaching enemy. But here, in the deep midwinter, the enemy is only the cold, and the watchman's duty is one of quiet, monotonous maintenance. He moves with a slowness that borders on the ritualistic. He is currently standing by the secondary brazier, his shadow cast long and flickering against the wall. His task is simple: to ensure the fire does not die, but also that it does not burn too bright. He reaches for a stack of peat blocks piled neatly near the hearth. Each block is a dense, dark rectangle of ancient earth, dried until it is light in the hand but heavy with potential heat. He picks one up, feeling the crumbly, fibrous texture of the compressed moss and roots against his palms. It is a dry, earthy sensation. He places the block onto the embers with such care that it makes no sound at all, merely a soft hiss as the heat begins to claim the new fuel. He then takes a long, iron fire poker. The iron is cool at the handle, where it has been resting away from the heat, and its surface is pitted with the marks of the forge. He gently nudges a glowing coal, moving it just an inch to the left to allow for better airflow. The sound is a minute metallic tink, followed by the soft, crumbling noise of ash giving way. He watches as a tiny pocket of orange light expands, illuminating the underside of the new peat block. This is his world for the next hour. The movement of coals, the monitoring of the glow, the preservation of the equilibrium. He moves to the next brazier, his boots, thick leather bound with woolen strips, making a dull, rhythmic thump hush on the flagstones. Each step is deliberate. He is not in a hurry. Time has no meaning when your only goal is to watch a fire burn. Let us look at the boots he wears. They are masterpieces of simple, functional design. The leather is thick, sourced from the hide of an old bull, and it has been treated with so much grease and tallow that it is entirely waterproof. Over years of wear, the leather has molded itself to the exact shape of his feet, developing deep, characterful creases across the bridge of the foot. The woolen wraps around his shins are a natural gray, the color of a winter sky. They are slightly damp at the bottom where they touched the floor, and as he stands near the brazier, a faint wisp of steam rises from the fabric. The smell of the wet wool from his own legs rises to meet him, a familiar, grounding aroma that speaks of long marches and the eventual comfort of the barracks. He feels the warmth of the fire penetrating the leather of his boots, a slow, creeping heat that starts at his toes and moves up his calves, loosening the tension in his muscles. On the walls, the moisture continues its slow, vertical journey. In the deep silence, if one were to listen with incredible focus, you might hear the sound of the condensation, the microscopic ticking of water molecules clustering together until they become a weight too great for the stone to hold. A single drop begins to slide down a particularly smooth block of granite. It moves with an erratic, stuttering pace, caught by a microscopic ridge in the stone, pausing, then gathering enough mass to continue its descent. It leaves a faint, shimmering trail behind it, a silver line that reflects the amber light of the embers. This trail will remain for hours, a map of the room's humidity, until the morning air eventually carries it away. The stone itself seems to absorb the sound of the room, acting as a massive mineral sponge that prevents any echo from forming. Beyond the watchman, the rows of bunks are like small, private islands of warmth. On a low shelf next to one of the sleepers sits a collection of personal items, each one a study in mundane history. There is a small wooden comb, carved from boxwood, its teeth fine and slightly uneven. Beside it is a whetstone, a smooth gray oval of slate that has been used so often it has a deep, concave dip in its center. The stone is cool and silent. There is also a small ceramic cup, the bottom of which still holds a faint, dried ring of ale or herbal tea. These objects are still, anchored in the shadows, waiting for the return of the day. They possess a quiet, inanimate patience. They do not demand attention. They simply exist, part of the fabric of the room. The ceiling rafters above are a dark, complex lattice. In the silence, the wood occasionally speaks, a slow, resonant creak that vibrates through the entire structure. This is not a sound of weakness, but of strength. It is the timber adjusting to the weight of the snow on the roof and the shift in temperature. The oak beams are massive, squared off by hand with broadaxes, and you can still see the rhythmic marks of the blade in the wood. These marks are like frozen waves, a record of the physical labor that went into creating this shelter. The smoke from the fires has turned the wood a deep, lustrous black, a patina that protects the timber from rot and insects. In the very highest reaches of the roof, the air is the warmest, a stagnant pool of heat that slowly seeps through the thatch, melting the bottommost layer of snow on the exterior and creating the slow drip that we heard earlier. The watchman now turns his attention to the lines of drying clothes. He walks along the row, his hand occasionally reaching out to touch a sleeve or a cloak. He is checking the progress of the drying. The wool feels different now than it did 3 hours ago. It is no longer soggy. It is heavy and damp, with a texture that is beginning to feel more like fabric and less like a wet sponge. As his fingers brush against the coarse weave, he feels the lanolin, the natural sheep's oil, which has been drawn to the surface by the heat. It leaves a faint, waxy residue on his skin, a sensation that is surprisingly pleasant. He adjusts a cloak that has begun to slide off its peg, lifting the heavy, sodden garment and refitting it with a slow, powerful movement of his shoulders. The sound of the wool hitting the stone wall is a soft, muffled thump, a sound that is immediately swallowed by the shadows. He reaches the end of the room where the great oak door stands. He places his hand against the wood. It is cold, bitterly, profoundly cold. He can feel the vibration of the wind on the other side, a low-frequency shudder that tells him the storm is still at its peak. But the door is 4 inches thick, reinforced with iron straps that are as wide as a man's hand. He checks the heavy wooden bolt, ensuring it is seated firmly in its stone sockets. The bolt is a massive piece of timber, polished smooth by the sliding of 1,000 nights. He runs his thumb over a knot in the wood, a small, circular swirl that feels like a hardened ripple. Everything is secure. The world outside is a chaos of white and gray, but here the air is still. The watchman exhales, a long, slow sigh that disappears into the humid darkness. He returns to his stool by the central brazier and sits. This is the height of his boring duty. He simply sits and observes. He watches the way the light catches the dust motes. He watches the way the shadows of the rafters create a rib cage-like pattern on the floor. He listens to the breathing of the men, a chorus of sighs, soft snores, and the deep, oceanic rhythm of lungs at rest. One man, several bunks away, mumbles something in his sleep, a fragmented word that sounds like home or hearth, and then settles back into the silence. The watchman does not move. He becomes part of the furniture, a silent guardian whose presence is felt rather than seen. The smell of the wet wool has now reached a state of perfect stasis. It is a thick, earthy perfume that provides a sense of immense continuity. It reminds one of the cycles of the year: the shearing in the spring, the washing in the streams, the spinning by the fireside in the autumn, and finally, the protection it provides in the winter. Each thread in these garments represents hours of human labor, a slow accumulation of effort that results in this one essential thing: warmth. In the barracks, this smell is the smell of survival. It is the scent of a community that has prepared itself for the long dark. As the watchman sits, he begins a slow mental inventory of the supplies he can see in the dim light. He looks at the stacks of firewood, counting the logs by their shapes. He looks at the sacks of grain, noting how the shadows fall across their slumped forms. He looks at the water barrel, listening for the rhythmic plink of the leak. This mental counting is a form of meditation, a way to pass the minutes without disturbing the silence. He is not thinking of the future or the past. He is entirely contained within the four walls of the barrack, focused on the textures and the sounds of the present. The air near the floor is cooler, a thin layer of chill that stays beneath the level of the bunks. The watchman lifts his feet and rests them on a stone ledge near the brazier, feeling the immediate relief as the heat begins to soak through his soles again. The sensation is hypnotic. It is a dull, pulsing warmth that travels through his bones, making his eyelids feel heavy. He resists the urge to sleep, not through effort, but through a calm, steady awareness. He is the witness to the night. He is the one who sees the fire turn from orange to red to gray. He is the one who hears the building settle into the earth. If you were lying in one of those bunks, you would see the watchman as a dark, reassuring silhouette against the firelight. You would feel the immense weight of the fur blankets pressing you into the straw, the dry stalks rustling with a soft, musical sound every time you breathed deeply. You would smell the wood smoke, the peat, and the heavy, damp wool, and you would know that everything is as it should be. The world is slow. The world is monotonous. The world is safe. There are no decisions to be made, no worries to be carried. There is only the texture of the blanket, the warmth of the fire, and the steady, unhurried passage of the winter night. The watchman reaches for his water skin, a vessel made of stitched leather. He unscrews the wooden cap with a slow, creaking turn. He takes a small sip, the water cool and tasting faintly of the resin used to seal the leather. He swallows slowly, the sound of it loud in his own ears. He replaces the cap and sets the skin back down on the floor. The movement is finished. The silence returns, deeper than before. The embers in the brazier have formed a delicate, glowing cave of heat, a miniature landscape of fiery canyons and ash-covered plains. He watches a single spark rise from this landscape, drifting upward on a current of warm air, dancing for a moment in the darkness before vanishing against the black of a rafter. It is a tiny, beautiful, and utterly inconsequential event. The barracks remain in their state of deep, humid peace. The smell of the wet wool persists, a thick blanket of scent that wraps around every sleeper, every stone, and every beam. It is a scent that promises tomorrow, a scent that says the winter is being held at bay. You are drifting now, the watchman's slow movements becoming a distant part of your own dreams. The sound of his boots, the hiss of the peat, and the heavy aroma of the drying fabric are all pulling you down, deeper into the soft, gray layers of sleep. The night continues its slow, majestic crawl toward the dawn, but for now there is only this: the warmth, the weight, and the beautiful, boring stillness of the winter barracks. The deep, velvet hours of the night have settled into a state of absolute permanence. In this phase of the winter darkness, time seems to have lost its forward momentum, becoming instead a circular, slow-moving tide that flows within the thick stone walls of the barrack. The atmosphere is now a dense, layered entity, a physical weight that rests upon every surface. The scent of wet wool, our constant companion, has undergone a subtle transformation. It is no longer the sharp, evocative smell of rain-soaked fleece. It has become something more mature, more integrated. It is now a warm, heavy musk, a foundational scent that signifies the very essence of human habitation in a frozen world. As the moisture continues to evaporate into the rafters, the air feels increasingly textured, thick, humid, and remarkably soft against the skin. Let us turn our attention to the physical reality of the crowded barrack. Space is at a premium here, yet there is no sense of claustrophobia. Instead, there is a profound feeling of collective security. The bunks are arranged with military precision, yet the clinical lines have been softened by the sheer volume of woolen blankets, fur pelts, and personal bundles. If you were to look down the central aisle, you would see a landscape of slumber, an undulating horizon of heavy fabrics. The proximity of the men creates a shared reservoir of warmth. Each person acts as a small, gentle furnace, contributing their own heat to the common air. The sound of their collective breathing has become a singular, oceanic roar, so steady and low-pitched that it acts as a form of silence in itself. It is a rhythmic, synchronized pulse, the heartbeat of the barrack. Near the wall, where the shadows are at their most dense, a row of shields is leaned against the stone. These are not symbols of war tonight. They are merely objects of wood and iron, resting after a long season of utility. Let us examine the nearest one. It is a circular shield, constructed from planks of seasoned linden wood. The wood is light yet resilient, and it has been covered with a layer of rawhide that was stretched tight and stitched while wet. Over the years, the rawhide has hardened into a surface as tough as bone. In the dim amber light of the dying embers, you can see the faint, ghostly outlines of the paint, perhaps a deep crimson or a faded ochre, now scuffed and weathered by the elements. The rim is bound in iron, held in place by small, handmade rivets. If you were to run a finger along the edge, you would feel the cold, pitted texture of the metal, a stark contrast to the warmth of the wood. The shield smells of old oil, dry leather, and a hint of the iron forge. It stands perfectly still, a silent sentinel in the gloom. Beside the shields, a bundle of spears is lashed together with a cord of braided hemp. The spear shafts are made of ash, a wood prized for its straight grain and its ability to absorb shock. The wood has been polished by the friction of many hands until it glows with a soft, inner light. The iron heads are protected by small caps of stitched leather, keeping the edges sharp and preventing the moisture in the air from causing rust. The smell of the hemp cord is dry and grassy, a scent that speaks of summer fields and the laborious process of retting and spinning the fibers. It is one of the many mundane, domestic smells that weave together to form the complex tapestry of the barracks interior. The watchman, still seated on his low wooden stool, reaches out to adjust a nearby lamp. This is a small iron cresset, a simple cup on a spike that is driven into a wooden post. It burns a mixture of tallow and animal fat. The flame is small and steady, casting a yellowish light that smells faintly of the kitchen. Tallow has a distinct heavy scent, a rich, fatty aroma that adds another layer to the smell of the wet wool. It is a clean, honest smell, the scent of a resource carefully managed. The watchman takes a small iron pick and gently trims the charred end of the wick. The sound is a microscopic snip, followed by the flame brightening for a moment as it finds fresh fuel. He moves with a slow, deliberate economy of motion, his hands steady and unhurried. For him, this small flame is a companion, a tiny sun in the vastness of the winter night. Let us consider the texture of the stone walls in this specific light. The blocks of granite and limestone are not uniform. Some are smooth and gray, while others are rough, with inclusions of quartz that glitter like trapped stars when the light hits them at just the right angle. The mortar between the stones is a study in gray, a mixture of lime, sand, and fine grit. In some places, the men have scratched small, idle marks into the mortar, a series of tallies, a simple geometric shape, or perhaps a single letter from an ancient alphabet. These marks are the only evidence of the hours spent in quiet contemplation. They are the boring history of the barracks, the record of men who sat where you are now, listening to the same wind and smelling the same wet wool. The floor near the door is covered with a thin layer of dry rushes. These rushes were harvested from the riverbanks in the late autumn and brought here to provide a layer of insulation and to absorb the moisture from boots. As the watchman occasionally shifts his weight, the rushes make a crisp, musical sound, a dry, hollow rustle that is one of the most characteristic noises of the medieval interior. The rushes have a faint, herbal scent, like dried tea, which is released whenever they are crushed. Over the course of the winter, they have become mixed with stray bits of wool, wood shavings, and the fine dust of the hearth, creating a soft, uneven surface that muffles the sound of footsteps. High above, the rafters continue their slow, tectonic shifts. The weight of the snow on the roof is immense, a thick, white mantle that compresses the thatch and puts a steady pressure on the timber frame. You can hear the roof settling, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrates through the air. It is the sound of the building resisting the elements, a confirmation of its structural integrity. The smoke from the braziers has gathered in the peak of the roof, forming a stagnant gray cloud that acts as a secondary layer of insulation. This smoke is ancient. It carries the essence of every fire that has ever burned in this hearth. It is a silent, hovering history of the barracks' warmth. In one of the middle bunks, a man moves slightly in his sleep. He is lying on his side, his face half buried in a pillow stuffed with waterfowl feathers. The sound of his movement is a soft hush as the fur blanket slides across his woolen tunic. He exhales a long, slow breath, a faint whistle through his teeth. His hand, calloused and strong, rests on the edge of the wooden frame. You can see the detail of his fingernails, the lines on his palm, and the heavy bronze ring he wears on his middle finger. The ring is a simple band, its surface worn smooth by years of wear. It reflects a tiny, distorted spark of light from the brazier. This man is a part of the crowd, yet in his sleep, he is entirely solitary, lost in the deep, dreamless quietude of the midwinter night. The smell of the wet wool is particularly thick around the bunks. Each man has his own cloak, his own tunics, and his own leg wraps, and each of these items is in a different stage of the drying process. The result is a complex, symphonic aroma of sheep's wool. There is the scent of the raw fleece, the scent of the vegetable dyes, madder, wode, and weld, and the scent of the wood smoke that has been absorbed by the fibers. It is a smell that is both animal and mineral, both wild and domestic. It is a smell that promises safety. In this era, to be surrounded by the smell of wet wool is to know that you are inside, that you are warm, and that you are among your own kind. The watchman rises from his stool to perform his next task. He walks to the large water butt at the end of the room. He needs to check the level of the water, ensuring there is enough for the morning's needs. He lifts the heavy wooden lid, the hinges making a slow, Protestant creak. The water inside is dark and still. He takes the applewood ladle and dips it into the water. The sound is a soft, liquid gurgle, followed by the rhythmic drip, drip, as he lifts the ladle out. He pours the water into a smaller ceramic pitcher with a steady, musical splash. The sound of the water is incredibly clear in the silence of the room, a bright, liquid note in a world of muffled fabrics and heavy stone. He replaces the lid with a dull thud, and the silence returns, even deeper than before. He then moves to the supply of firewood. He selects 2 logs of seasoned oak. They are heavy and dense, their bark thick and rugged. He carries them to the central brazier, his footsteps making a rhythmic crunch on the rushes. He places the logs onto the glowing bed of peat with a slow, careful movement. He does not want to stir up too much ash. He watches as the heat immediately begins to attack the wood. A small curl of blue smoke rises from a crack in the bark, followed by a tiny, flickering flame that begins to lick at the edges of the log. The fire is being fed. The equilibrium is being maintained. The watchman stands for a moment, the warmth of the fresh flames reflecting in his eyes. He is the guardian of the cycle. The air in the barrack is now at its peak of humidity. If you were to hold your hand up, you could almost feel the moisture as a tangible presence between your fingers. It is a warm, soft dampness that makes the skin feel supple and the breath feel easy. This humidity is the secret to the barrack's comfort. It holds the heat of the braziers, preventing it from dissipating into the stone. It creates a cocoon of warmth that wraps around every sleeper, every shield, and every sack of grain. The smell of the wet wool is the herald of this humidity, a scent that signals the victory of the interior over the exterior. Outside, the wind has reached a new level of intensity. It is no longer a hum. It is a roar, a vast, elemental force that scours the landscape. You can hear the sleet hitting the stone walls, a sound like thousands of tiny needles being thrown against the building. But inside, this sound is merely a background texture, a reminder of the harshness that is being successfully excluded. The walls of the barrack are a fortress of boredom, a place where the only events are the burning of a log, the dripping of a ladle, and the drying of a cloak. This monotony is a luxury. It is the highest form of peace. As the watchman returns to his stool, the room settles back into its rhythmic stillness. The new logs in the brazier begin to crackle softly, a gentle, domestic sound that punctuates the oceanic breathing of the men. The shadows on the walls resume their slow, hypnotic dance, stretching and receding with the flickering of the flames. The smell of the wet wool persists, a deep, grounding aroma that pulls the mind towards sleep. You are there in the midst of this crowded, quiet space, protected by the stone, the wood, and the collective warmth of the community. There is nothing to worry about. There is nothing to do. The night is long, the fire is steady, and the wool is drying. You feel your mind drifting, caught in the slow, circular tide of the barracks night. The darkness is a soft, woolen blanket, and you are sinking deep into its folds. The world is at rest. The barrack is at rest. You are at rest. The deepest valley of the night has been reached, that silent, hollow hour when the world seems to hold its breath in the face of the winter's absolute dominion. Inside the barrack, the air has reached a point of saturation that feels almost liquid. The scent of wet wool is no longer a guest in the room. It is the host. It has permeated the very fibers of the wood and the pores of the stone, creating a sensory environment that is as thick and heavy as a physical quilt. As the watchman sits in the amber twilight of the central hearth, he observes the subtle shift in the room's character. The initial steam that rose from the damp cloaks has settled into a low, invisible mist that clings to the floor and swirls around the legs of the bunks. This humidity carries the warmth of the fire into the furthest, darkest corners of the room, ensuring that even the stones furthest from the heat are no longer biting to the touch. Let us focus on the watchman's current task, a task born of necessity and the quiet patience of the winter months. He has reached into a small leather satchel at his side and produced a whetstone. This stone is a long, rectangular sliver of slate, dark gray and cool, with edges that have been rounded by years of contact with steel. He also produces a small utility knife, a simple blade with a handle of smoothed antler. The knife is not a weapon of war tonight. It is a tool of the hearth, used for cutting bread, slicing leather, or whittling small wooden pegs. The watchman begins the process of sharpening the blade. This is a rhythmic, hypnotic ritual. He applies a single drop of oil to the surface of the stone. The oil is clear and viscous, and it spreads slowly across the slate, catching the light like a small, dark mirror. Then he begins the motion. S-H-H-H, S-H-H-H, S-H-H-H. The sound of the steel moving against the grit of the stone is a soft, melodic friction. It is a sound that defines the silence of the room. He holds the blade at a precise, shallow angle, his thumb resting firmly on the back of the steel to maintain a constant pressure. He moves the knife in a slow, circular pattern, tracing the length of the stone from one end to the other. Each stroke is identical to the last. There is no hurry. The metal of the blade is cool, but the friction of the sharpening process creates a microscopic heat that the watchman can feel through his fingertips. The smell of the oil, clean, mineral, and sharp, mingles with the underlying scent of the wet wool, creating a new layer of sensory detail. He wipes the blade on a fragment of old linen, the fabric making a soft zip against the edge. He inspects the steel in the firelight, watching the way the orange glow dances along the newly polished edge. Then he begins again. SHHH, SHHH, SHHH. This repetitive sound acts as a focal point for the entire room. For anyone lying awake in the bunks, it is a comforting metronome, a sign that the watch is being kept and that the world is in order. The sharpening of a blade is a fundamental act of maintenance, a rejection of the entropy of the winter. It is a slow, steady investment in the future, a way of saying that there will be more bread to cut, more leather to mend, and more days to survive. The watchman's eyes are fixed on the stone, his mind entirely occupied by the physical sensations of the work, the resistance of the steel, the smoothness of the oil, and the rhythmic sound of the friction. This is the essence of the boring history, the millions of hours spent by millions of people in the quiet upkeep of their world. Beyond the watchman's small circle of light, the architecture of the barrack reveals its mundane beauty. The central pillars, carved from massive oak trunks, rise up to support the weight of the roof. These pillars are not perfectly round. They bear the marks of the adze and the chisel, a series of shallow, rhythmic facets that give the wood a textured, organic appearance. Over the decades, the oils from the hands of the men have polished the lower sections of the pillars to a lustrous, dark sheen. If you were to lean your head against the wood, you would feel its immense solidity, a vibration that carries the sound of the wind from the roof down into the earth. The pillars are the bones of the building, and in the deep night, they seem to groan with the weight of the snow and the responsibility of protection. Consider the floor around the pillars. In addition to the rushes and the flagstones, there are areas where the earth has been packed so hard it has the consistency of stone. In these areas, the dust of the hearth has settled in a fine gray layer, like a soft carpet of ash. This dust is composed of the remnants of 1,000 fires, microscopic fragments of peat, oak, and pine. It is a material history of the warmth of the barrack. Occasionally, a small draft near the floor will cause the dust to swirl in a slow, lazy eddy, a miniature storm that exists for a few seconds before settling back into the stillness. The sound of the watchman's whetstone continues to echo softly off these hard-packed surfaces, the high-pitched SHHH of the steel becoming a duller, more muffled sound as it travels toward the back of the room. The smell of the wet wool has reached a point where it is no longer just a scent, it is a texture. The air feels thick, as if it has a certain resistance to movement. This is the result of the humidity interacting with the fibers of the blankets and tunics. Each woolen garment is like a small sponge, holding onto the warmth and the moisture of the room. If you were to touch one of the blankets now, it would feel heavy and slightly damp, but profoundly warm. A warmth that is generated by the sleeper beneath and held in place by the density of the weave. The wool does not just insulate, it regulates. It creates a stable, unchanging environment in a world that is otherwise defined by the chaotic fluctuations of the winter storm. Let us look at the storage area at the far end of the barrack, where the winter rations are kept. This area is a masterclass in logistics and mundane preparation. There are barrels of salted pork, the wood of the barrels stained dark by the brine. The smell of the salt is a sharp, clean note in the heavy air. Beside the barrels are stacks of hardtack, flat, dense biscuits made of rye and water, baked until they are as hard as ceramic. These biscuits are the foundation of the winter diet, a food that does not rot, does not change, and provides a slow, steady release of energy. The biscuits are stored in linen bags to keep them dry, and the bags are hung from the rafters to protect them from the damp floor. The sound of the wind outside occasionally causes these bags to sway slightly, their weight making the wooden pegs creak with a slow, rhythmic protest. In the shadows near the rations, there are also bundles of dried herbs, thyme, rosemary, and sage, harvested in the height of the summer and hung here to dry. Even now, in the middle of winter, they release a faint, ghostly fragrance whenever the air moves. It is a scent of sun-drenched hillsides and buzzing bees, a memory of a different world that is preserved here in the darkness. This herbal scent mingles with the wet wool and the wood smoke, creating a complex, layered atmosphere that is uniquely characteristic of the winter barracks. It is the smell of a community that has successfully gathered the resources of the summer to survive the trials of the winter. The watchman has finished sharpening his knife. He tests the edge against the ball of his thumb with a slow, delicate pressure. Satisfied, he wipes the blade one last time and slides it back into its leather sheath. The sound is a soft, leather-on-steel hiss, followed by the dull thud of the antler handle seating into the throat of the sheath. He sets the whetstone and the oil aside, his movements slow and deliberate. He takes a moment to look around the room, his eyes scanning the rows of bunks. Everything is in order. The fires are steady. The men are asleep. The air is heavy. He feels a sense of quiet satisfaction, a boring but profound contentment in the successful management of the environment. He rises from his stool and walks toward the center of the room, where a large iron cauldron sits on a tripod over the embers. This cauldron contains the morning's gruel, which has been simmering slowly throughout the night. He takes a long wooden paddle and stirs the mixture. The sound is a thick, bubbling glup, glup, as the heavy grains of barley and oats are moved through the water. The steam that rises from the cauldron is rich and nutty, carrying the scent of the cooked grain into the rafters. This is the final layer of the barracks atmosphere, the smell of the coming meal. It is a smell that promises strength and continuity. The watchman stirs the pot for several minutes, his arm moving in a slow, hypnotic circle. He is not just preparing food. He is participating in the ancient rhythm of the hearth. As he stirs, he listens to the thatch of the roof. The thatch is composed of layers of reeds and straw over a foot thick, and it is a living, breathing part of the building. In the deep winter, the thatch becomes a complex ecosystem of its own. You can hear the snow compacting on the surface, a sound like a very slow, very heavy footstep. You can hear the moisture seeping through the layers, a faint, rhythmic drip that is absorbed by the internal beams. The thatch is a perfect insulator, trapping the heat of the fires and the breath of the men, creating a warm, protective cap for the entire barrack. The sound of the wind is filtered through the straw, turned from a roar into a low-frequency hum that vibrates in the chest. One of the men in a nearby bunk wakes for a moment, disturbed perhaps by the smell of the cooking gruel. He does not open his eyes. He merely pulls his woolen blanket higher, tucking it under his chin. He feels the weight of the fabric, the scratchy texture of the fibers, and the deep, humid warmth that surrounds him. He hears the watchman stirring the cauldron, the rhythmic glup, glup of the paddle. To him, these sounds are the ultimate reassurance. They mean that he is safe, that he is being cared for, and that the morning will come in its own time. He inhales the scent of the wet wool, the smell of his own cloak drying on the peg, and the smell of the barley, and he drifts back into the heavy, dreamless sleep of the midwinter. The watchman replaces the lid on the cauldron with a soft, metallic clink. He returns to his stool and sits. The room is still once more. The only sound is the breathing of the men and the distant, muffled song of the wind. The scent of the wet wool remains the dominant force in the room, a thick, comforting presence that signifies the endurance of the barracks. The night is far from over, but the climax of the storm has passed. The world is transitioning into the final, quietest phase of the darkness. You are there in the midst of it all, your senses filled with the textures, the sounds, and the smells of this ancient, boring world. You are sinking deeper into the layers of history, the weight of the stone and the wool pulling you down into a state of total rest. The fire is low. The air is warm. The wool is dry. Sleep now. Sleep. The barrack has entered the most profound stage of its nocturnal suspension. We are now in the hour of the deep watch, that liminal space where the night has shed its initial turbulence and has settled into a thick, unmoving sediment of time. The air within the stone walls is so heavy with moisture and warmth that it feels as though the room itself has become a single, slow-breathing organism. The scent of the wet wool, which has defined the sensory landscape for hours, has undergone yet another subtle chemical shift. The initial sharp, mineral tang of the cold rain and sleet has evaporated, replaced now by a deep, earthy, and slightly sweet aroma. This is the smell of the wool's heart, the scent of the lanolin and the natural oils of the sheep, warmed by the fire until it becomes a rich, amber perfume that coats the back of the throat and settles in the lungs like a warm balm. It is a scent that signifies total insulation. It is the smell of a world where the cold has been defeated by the slow, patient application of heat. The watchman, whose movements have become as slow and predictable as the shifting of the stars, now turns his attention to a task that is the very epitome of necessary monotony, the inspection and maintenance of the communal footwear. He moves toward the long wooden bench near the door, where the men's boots have been lined up in a neat, silent row. These boots are not merely shoes. They are complex constructions of leather, sinew, and iron, and in this environment their condition is a matter of survival. He picks up the first pair, feeling the immense weight of the thick, water-hardened leather. The boots are cold at the toes but warm where they have been facing the hearth. He holds them up to the dim light of his tallow lamp, observing the way the light catches the salt-stained rings on the leather, white, ghostly maps of the day's toil in the slush and the mud. With a slow, deliberate motion, he reaches for a small ceramic pot containing a mixture of rendered bear fat and beeswax. The lid of the pot makes a soft, sticky clack as he removes it. The scent of the grease is heavy and animalistic, a primordial aroma that cuts through the sweetness of the drying wool. He takes a fragment of coarse linen and dips it into the grease, the fabric making a minute squelch as it absorbs the oil. Then he begins to apply the grease to the leather of the boot. Swish, swish, swish. The sound is rhythmic and hypnotic, the sound of a hand moving in a steady, circular pattern over a rough surface. He watches as the dull, salt-parched leather drinks in the oil, turning from a pale, thirsty gray to a deep, lustrous, and healthy black. He works the grease into the seams, ensuring that the waxed thread is thoroughly coated to prevent the moisture of the morning from penetrating the interior. This is a task that requires no thought, only a steady hand and an endless supply of patience. For the watchman, the world has narrowed down to the texture of the leather and the smell of the grease. He does not think of the miles these boots will walk tomorrow. He only thinks of the stitch he is currently protecting. Each boot takes several minutes to treat. He moves with a glacial economy of movement, his fingers stained dark by the oil, his breathing synchronized with the rhythmic swish of the cloth. This is the boring reality of history, the quiet, unrecorded hours spent in the maintenance of the mundane. The barracks are filled with the sound of this soft friction, a sound that is punctuated only by the occasional, distant crack of the freezing earth outside or the deep, guttural sigh of a sleeper. As he works, the watchman observes the frost that has begun to grow on the inside of the narrow window slits. These windows are mere cracks in the 3-foot-thick stone walls, designed to let in a sliver of light while keeping out the worst of the elements. Because of the extreme cold outside and the heavy humidity inside, the moisture in the air has begun to crystallize against the cold stone. These frost flowers are intricate, fractal patterns of ice, growing with a slow, silent ferocity. They look like delicate ferns made of glass, their transparent fronds reaching out across the gray granite. In the amber light of the braziers, the frost glitters with a cold, internal fire, a reminder of the beautiful, lethal world that exists just inches beyond the wall. The watchman pauses for a moment, his hand resting on a half-greased boot, as he watches a single crystal of ice expand by a fraction of a millimeter. It is a movement so slow it is almost imperceptible, a silent growth in a silent room. The smell of the wet wool is particularly concentrated near the drying racks. The watchman rises from his bench and walks over to the garments, his boots making a soft, muffled crunch on the rushes. He reaches out to touch a heavy woolen cloak. The fabric is no longer damp to the touch. It has reached a state of toasty dryness on the surface, though the core of the thick weave still holds a lingering, humid weight. As he runs his hand over the wool, he can feel the texture of the individual fibers, the slight prickle of the guard hairs and the softness of the undercoat. The wool is warm, having absorbed the radiant heat of the peat fires. It feels like a living thing, a warm, heavy pelt that is ready to be worn. He adjusts the positioning of several tunics, ensuring that the air can circulate freely through the sleeves. The sound of the wool shifting on the wooden pegs is a series of soft, heavy thumps, sounds that are immediately absorbed by the stagnant air. Let us consider the state of the fire in the primary brazier. The peat blocks have burned down into a landscape of glowing, crimson canyons and high, gray peaks of ash. The heat it radiates is no longer the sharp, aggressive warmth of a fresh flame, but a deep, resonant and subterranean heat that seems to vibrate through the floor. The watchman takes a small iron shovel and gently moves the ash, uncovering a hidden cache of glowing coals. The sound is a soft, dry scrape, followed by the muffled clink of the coals settling into a new configuration. He does not add more fuel yet. He wants to utilize every last joule of heat from the existing embers. He watches as a thin, silver ribbon of smoke rises from a charred fragment of wood, swirling in a lazy, hypnotic spiral before disappearing into the shadows of the rafters. The smoke carries the scent of the ancient bogs, a mossy, mineral aroma that grounds the room in the deep time of the earth. In the bunks, the men are lost in the deepest phase of their rest. Their bodies are completely submerged in the layers of straw, wool, and fur. If you were to look at a single sleeper, you would see only the top of his head and the steady rise and fall of the heavy blankets. The blankets are made of walked wool, fabric that has been thickened and felted through a long process of soaking and beating until it is nearly windproof and incredibly heavy. This weight is a form of comfort. It presses down on the body, signaling to the nervous system that it is safe to let go, to sink into the mattress, and to surrender to the night. The sound of the straw mattress is now a rare occurrence. The straw has been compressed into a solid, supportive mass that no longer rustles with every minor movement. The silence of the bunks is a heavy, physical thing, a density of peace that fills the gaps between the watchman's movements. High above, the darkness of the roof is absolute. The rafters, those massive, soot-blackened ribs of oak, are invisible, yet their presence is felt in the way the sound of the room is muffled. The roof is a great, silent lung, inhaling the smoke and the humidity and exhaling a faint, ghostly warmth into the winter sky. In this upper region, the air is the most stagnant. It is a pool of history, containing the microscopic remnants of every conversation, every meal, and every breath taken within these walls. If you could see the air, it would look like a slow-moving river of amber and gray, flowing in grand, languid circles around the central pillars. The watchman returns to his bench and picks up the next pair of boots. This pair is smaller, perhaps belonging to a young recruit. The leather is less scarred, the soles less worn. He applies the grease with the same care he gave to the first pair. Swish, swish, swish. His mind drifts to the logistics of the coming dawn. He thinks of the bags of grain that will need to be opened, the water that will need to be boiled for the morning meal, and the way the snow will need to be cleared from the door. These are not worries. They are merely the points on a map of the coming day. They have a comforting predictability. In the barracks, the future is not a source of anxiety, but a series of repetitive, manageable tasks. The boringness of the routine is the very thing that makes life possible in such a harsh environment. The scent of the wet wool continues to be the primary anchor for the watchman's consciousness. It is a scent that never leaves him. It is in his own clothes, in the air he breathes, and in the blankets of the men he guards. It is a smell that represents the collective effort of the community. To produce these garments, sheep had to be raised, sheared, the wool washed in cold streams, carded, spun on heavy wooden spindles, and finally woven on upright looms. Every inch of the fabric hanging in this room is the result of hundreds of hours of human labor. This is why the wool is treated with such respect, why it is dried so carefully, and why its smell is so deeply associated with the concept of home. It is the scent of human ingenuity applied to the simplest of materials. The watchman finishes the last pair of boots. He sets them down with a soft thump and looks at his hands. They are coated in a fine layer of bare fat and soot, the skin appearing dark and polished in the lamplight. He takes a piece of dry straw and scrapes the worst of the grease from his fingers, then wipes them on a rag. The sensation of the oil on his skin is warm and protective. He rises and stretches his limbs, his joints making a series of soft, muffled pops that sound like distant twigs snapping in the frost. He walks to the center of the room and stands over the primary brazier, letting the heat soak into his legs. He is tired, but it is a good tiredness, the steady, rhythmic fatigue of a job well done. He looks at the water pitcher he filled earlier. He takes a small sip, the water tasting of the cold stone and the iron of the cauldron. He swallows, and the sound is a single, clear note in the silence. He then takes a long, wooden stick and gently pokes at the thatch of the roof near the ventilation hole. He is checking for ice buildup that might block the exit of the smoke. The thatch is thick and springy, making a soft, rustling sound as he probes it. He feels the resistance of the frozen layers and the softness of the interior straw. Everything is clear. The smoke continues its slow, invisible journey out into the night. The barrack is at peace. The smell of the wet wool, the warmth of the peat, the glow of the tallow, and the rhythmic breathing of the men all combine to create an environment of total hypnotic boringness. There is no drama here. There is no conflict. There is only the slow drying of fabric, the steady greasing of leather, and the patient waiting for the sun. You are there with the watchman, standing in the warmth of the brazier, your senses filled with the heavy, humid atmosphere of the ancient world. You feel your own eyelids growing heavy, the repetitive sounds of the watchman's duties acting as a lullaby. The world is small. The world is stone and wool. The world is safe. You are drifting now, sinking back into the deep woolen darkness, your mind as still as the frost flowers on the window. Sleep is coming, a heavy, dreamless sleep that will last until the first gray light of the winter dawn. The wool is dry. The boots are greased. The fire is steady. Sleep. The deep, heavy stillness of the pre-dawn hour has now fully claimed the barracks. This is the time when the night feels as though it might never end, a state of suspended animation where the boundaries between the stone walls, the woolen blankets, and the dreams of the sleeping men have become blurred and indistinguishable. The air is at its most dense, a humid, warm soup that has been seasoned by hours of slow fire, rhythmic breathing, and the steady evaporation of moisture from the rows of hanging garments. The scent of wet wool, our constant sensory anchor, has reached a state of absolute maturity. It is no longer a scent that one smells in the traditional sense. It is a scent that one inhabits. It has become a foundational element of the atmosphere, as solid and reliable as the granite blocks of the walls. It carries the history of the day's work and the night's rest, a deep, musk-like perfume that speaks of protection, warmth, and the quiet triumph of the interior world over the frozen void outside. The watchman, sitting by the central hearth, feels the immense weight of this hour. His movements have slowed even further, reaching a pace that is almost geological in its deliberation. He reaches for a small, cylindrical piece of ash wood, a tally stick. This stick is his record of the winter's progress, a mundane but essential ledger of the passing days. He holds it in his hand, feeling the smooth, pale grain of the wood. The ash is dry and hard, having been kept near the warmth of the fire for weeks. He picks up the small utility knife he sharpened in the previous hour. The blade, now honed to a mirror-like edge, catches a sliver of amber light from the embers. He begins to carve a single, shallow notch into the wood. Scritch. The sound is tiny, a microscopic shearing of wood fibers that is nevertheless clear and sharp in the profound silence of the room. He moves the blade with a slow, surgical precision, peeling away a tiny, translucent curl of wood that looks like a fragment of parchment. The smell of the freshly cut ash wood rises to meet him, a clean, slightly sweet and grassy aroma that provides a brief, sharp contrast to the heavy, animalistic scent of the wet wool. He inspects the notch, running the tip of his thumb over the indentation. It is smooth and perfect. This small mark represents another night survived, another rotation of the earth through the winter darkness. He sets the stick down on the wooden crate beside him with a soft, resonant clack. The movement is finished. The silence returns, heavier than before. Let us focus on the central cauldron, which has been simmering over the peat embers for many hours. The mixture inside, a thick porridge of cracked barley, dried peas, and a few scraps of salt-cured meat, has undergone a slow thermal transformation. The barley grains have swollen to 3 times their original size, their outer husks softening until they are as tender as silk. The water has thickened into a rich, starchy cream that captures the heat and holds it with a stubborn persistence. Occasionally, a single bubble of steam works its way from the bottom of the iron pot to the surface. It rises slowly, a tiny, hot pocket of air that finally breaks the surface with a thick, viscous plop. The sound is followed by a fresh release of steam, which carries the scent of the cooking grain into the rafters. It is a wholesome, nutty aroma, the smell of the earth's bounty prepared for human consumption. The steam swirls in the air, illuminated for a moment by the dying glow of the fire, before it is absorbed by the heavy humidity of the room. The watchman watches the steam, his eyes following the lazy, chaotic patterns of its ascent. To him, the sound of the bubbling gruel is the heartbeat of the morning, a signal that the cycle of labor and sustenance is about to begin anew, even if that beginning is still several hours away. The walls of the barrack, those massive, unyielding protectors, are now radiating a steady, low-level warmth. They have spent the night absorbing the radiant heat from the braziers, and now they are giving it back, acting as a thermal battery for the room. If you were to press your ear against the stone, you might hear the microscopic ticks and groans of the mineral structure as it expands and contracts. This is the sound of the building's endurance. The mortar between the stones is dry and crumbly in some places, while in others, it has been hardened by the moisture into a surface as tough as the granite itself. You can trace the path of the mason's chisels in the dim light, the rhythmic, overlapping scars that tell the story of the thousands of hammer strikes required to create this shelter. The stone is a witness to the boredom of the centuries, a silent observer of 1,000 identical winter nights. High above, the roof thatch is at its most compressed. The weight of the snow on the exterior is now several inches thick, a white, insulating blanket that seals the heat inside with incredible efficiency. This snow acts as a sound deadener, turning the roar of the wind into a distant, muffled vibration that can only be felt in the soles of the feet. Inside the thatch, within the layers of reed and straw, a slow migration of heat is taking place. The warmest air from the room rises into the peak, where it meets the freezing underside of the roof. This creates a zone of transition, a place where the steam from the wet wool and the cauldron condenses into tiny, crystalline droplets that cling to the straw. Occasionally, one of these droplets becomes too heavy and falls, making a soft hiss as it hits a hot coal in one of the peripheral braziers. This is the only weather that exists inside the barracks, a slow, internal rain of condensation. Consider the sensation of the wool blankets on the sleeping men. In this pre-dawn hour, the blankets have reached a state of perfect equilibrium with the bodies beneath them. They have trapped a layer of air that is exactly the temperature of human skin. The wool fibers, with their natural crimp and elasticity, create a springy, airy structure that is both light and incredibly insulating. The weight of the blanket is a comforting pressure, a sensory input that encourages the brain to remain in a state of deep, dreamless rest. If you were to lift a corner of one of these blankets, you would feel a sudden, sharp intake of the room's humid air, followed by the immediate warmth that radiates from the sleeper. But no one moves. The men are anchored in their bunks by the sheer density of their fatigue and the overwhelming coziness of their environment. The scent of the wet wool is particularly evocative near the boots that the watchman greased in the previous hour. The bare fat and beeswax have settled into the pores of the leather, creating a protective, oily skin that smells rich and primeval. This scent mingles with the lanolin of the wool and the smoke of the peat, creating a sensory profile that is unique to this time and place. It is a smell that would be instantly recognizable to any inhabitant of the ancient world, the smell of a secure winter quarters. It is a smell that bypasses the rational mind and speaks directly to the instincts, whispering that the fire is lit, the walls are thick, and the morning is yet far off. The watchman rises from his stool, his joints making a soft, dry creak that echoes the settling of the roof beams. He walks to the far end of the room, near the supply of grain sacks. He wants to check the state of the air in the corners. He moves with a slow, gliding gait, his boots making almost no sound on the rush-covered floor. As he reaches the shadows, he feels the slight drop in temperature, a pool of cooler air that has settled near the floor. He reaches out and touches one of the burlap sacks. The fabric is rough and dry, and he can feel the individual grains of barley shifting beneath his fingers. The sound is a soft, musical shush, like the sound of a distant sea. He leans his head against the stack of sacks, closing his eyes for a moment. He is not sleeping, he is simply listening. He hears the wind, the bubbling cauldron, the rhythmic breathing of the men, and the slow, persistent drip of the melting frost. In the silence, he notices a small, rhythmic scratching sound coming from the wall behind the grain sacks. It is a mouse, a tiny, invisible inhabitant of the barracks that lives in the gaps between the stones. The mouse is also a creature of the winter, seeking the warmth and the stray grains of the human world. Its scratching is a frantic, high-pitched sound, a tiny, frantic energy in the midst of the vast, slow stillness of the room. The watchman does not mind the mouse. It is part of the ecosystem of the barracks, a reminder that life continues in every nook and cranny of the building. He listens to the scratching for a minute or more, his mind following the tiny movements of the rodent behind the granite. Then, the sound stops, and the silence returns, deeper and more profound than before. He returns to the center of the room and takes a long wooden paddle to stir the cauldron one last time. He moves the paddle in a slow, clockwise circle, feeling the resistance of the thick, starchy gruel. The sound is a heavy, rhythmic slop, 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 as the paddle moves through the grains. He can feel the steam rising against his face, a warm, moist cloud that smells of summer fields and hard labor. He replaces the lid, ensuring it is seated firmly to trap the heat. The click of the lid against the iron rim is a soft, final note. He then moves to the central brazier and adds one final block of peat. He places it on the very center of the glowing coals, watching as the edges of the dark moss begin to turn a bright, incandescent orange. The heat from this new fuel will carry the room through the final hours of the night and into the first light of the dawn. The air in the barrack is now at its peak of boringness. There is absolutely nothing happening that requires attention. The fire is stable, the food is cooking, the men are sleeping, and the walls are holding. This is the ultimate goal of the sleep story writer, to create a world so secure and so repetitive that the mind has no choice but to let go of its vigilance. The watchman sits back down on his stool, his hands resting on his knees. He gazes into the heart of the fire, his vision blurring as he focuses on the flickering patterns of the light. The shadows of the rafters dance on the walls in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, stretching and shrinking with the pulse of the flame. The scent of the wet wool is a warm, humid blanket that wraps around him, pulling him toward his own moment of rest. Outside, the first hint of the blue hour is beginning to touch the world. The absolute blackness of the night is shifting into a deep, bruised purple, though this change is invisible within the windowless depths of the barrack. The storm has finally begun to lose its teeth, the wind falling from a roar to a steady, mournful sigh. The world is waiting for the sun, but here, in the heart of the stone and the wool, the night is still absolute. You are there with the watchman, suspended in this moment of perfect, monotonous peace. You feel the weight of the blankets, the warmth of the fire, and the heavy, comforting scent of the drying fabric. Your breathing has slowed to match the rhythm of the room, a deep, oceanic pulse that carries you toward the final, most restful stage of your sleep. The world is quiet. The barracks are safe. The wool is dry. The night has reached its final, most fragile chapter. This is the hour of the deep gray, the time when the stars have begun to dissolve into the thickening atmosphere of the approaching dawn, though within the massive, windowless stone confines of the barrack, the transition is felt more as a change in the weight of the silence rather than a shift in light. We are now in a state of absolute, saturated peace. The air, which has been a living, humid entity throughout the night, has reached a point of perfect thermal inertia. The scent of the wet wool, which was once the sharp, evocative signal of the day's struggle against the elements, has now mellowed into a profound, earthy sweetness. It is the scent of victory, the smell of 1,000 individual fibers that have finally surrendered their moisture to the patient heat of the hearth. The blankets and cloaks hanging from the iron pegs are no longer heavy with liquid. They are now warm, plump with trapped air, and radiating a subtle woolen heat of their own. If you were to walk down the central aisle of the barrack now, the air would feel like a physical embrace, a soft, invisible fog of comfort that smells of lanolin, ancient wood smoke, and the deep, resinous heart of the peat. The watchman, whose entire existence has been narrowed down to the slow maintenance of this equilibrium, now performs a task of exquisite boredom: the cleaning of the secondary oil lamps. These are simple bronze vessels, shaped like shallow tears, which have been burning since the sun first dipped below the frozen horizon. He moves with a slowness that suggests he is moving through water. He reaches for a small, curved iron scraper, its edge slightly dull from decades of use. He picks up the first lamp, feeling the warmth of the bronze against his oil-stained palms. The metal is smooth, polished by the friction of 1,000 nights. With a deliberate, rhythmic motion, he begins to scrape the accumulated soot from the rim of the lamp. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound is a low, dry friction, a microscopic grinding of carbon against metal that resonates through his hands and into his arms. He watches as the black, powdery soot falls in tiny, silent avalanches onto a piece of old leather he has laid across his knees. The soot is as fine as the dust of a butterfly's wing, a concentrated essence of the night's fuel. He clears the air holes of the lamp with a thin wooden splinter, the sound a series of minute clicks as the wood finds the gaps in the metal. This is a task that serves no purpose other than the preservation of order. The light of the lamp is not needed for battle or for celebration. It is needed only to mark the boundaries of the room, to provide a flicker of certainty in the vast, humid dark. The smell of the charred oil, a heavy, slightly bitter aroma, mingles with the underlying scent of the wool, creating a complex olfactory landscape that is both grounding and hypnotic. He wipes the bronze with a rag soaked in mutton fat, the fabric making a soft, oily hush as it slides over the metal, leaving behind a dull, protective sheen. As he works, the watchman's eyes wander to the floorboards beneath the bunks. In the dim, amber twilight of the dying embers, the floor reveals its secret history. It is a mosaic of textures: the smooth, cold flagstones near the entrance, the packed, ancient earth in the center, and the wide, silver-gray planks of oak that run the length of the sleeping quarters. The planks are scarred by the passage of heavy boots, their grain raised in places like the ripples on a wind-swept pond. In the crevices between the boards, the dust of the winter has gathered, a fine gray sediment of ash, straw, and microscopic fragments of wool. Occasionally, a single dust mote, caught in the slow-moving thermal currents of the room, will drift down and settle into a groove. It is a movement of such inconsequence that it becomes the most important thing in the world to the watchman. He watches the mote fall, his mind entirely empty of thought, his breathing a slow, synchronized echo of the room's collective pulse. The silence of the barrack is now layered like the strata of the earth. At the surface, there is the distant, hollow moan of the wind, which has now settled into a steady, rhythmic sigh, no longer the aggressive roar of the midnight hours. Beneath that, there is the sound of the roof settling, the occasional deep thrum of the massive oak rafters as they adjust to the shifting weight of the snow. And below that, the most intimate level of sound, the breathing of the men. It is a slow, oceanic roar, a chorus of deep, resonant inhalations and long, whistling exhalations. Each man is a separate world of dreams, yet together they form a single, rhythmic machine of survival. One sleeper turns slightly, the straw of his mattress making a dry, papery rustle that lasts for 5 seconds before dissolving back into the silence. The sound is so clear that you can hear the individual stalks of straw snapping and shifting. It is a sound that defines the word boring, a sound that carries no information and demands no action. It is the sound of total safety. Let us return to the scent of the wool. It is now at its peak of coziness. The dampness has been replaced by a toasty quality, a scent that is warm and slightly dusty, like a library of ancient books or a sun-drenched attic. The lanolin has been drawn out by the heat, coating the fibers and making the fabric feel supple and heavy. This smell is a shield. It is the primary reason the men can sleep so deeply while a blizzard rages just feet away. The wool is their second skin, a barrier of human craft that stands between their warmth and the absolute zero of the winter night. The watchman breathes it in, the humid air cooling slightly in the back of his throat, and he feels a sense of immense, unshakable permanence. The barracks have stood for 100 winters, and they will stand for 100 more. The wool will be sheared, spun, and woven. The peat will be cut and dried, and the fire will be kept. The cycle is the comfort. The monotony is the salvation. High above, the darkness of the rafters has begun to soften. It is not that there is more light, but rather that the eyes of the watchman have become so accustomed to the gloom that he can now see the textures of the soot-blackened wood. He can see the heavy iron bolts that hold the beams together, their heads encrusted with a fine patina of rust and carbon. He can see the underside of the thatch, thousands of individual reeds and stalks of straw, packed so tightly they form a solid, organic ceiling. The heat of the room has caused the moisture within the thatch to move outward, creating a microscopic layer of ice on the exterior that further seals the building. The barrack is now a pressurized vessel of warmth, held together by the weight of the snow and the strength of the timber. A single, crystalline drop of water hangs from a particularly low beam. It has been growing for an hour, fed by the humidity of the men's breath. It catches a glint of the firelight, glowing like a tiny, liquid diamond, before finally surrendering to gravity and falling with a soft, musical plink into the water barrel below. The watchman rises from his bench to perform his final check of the night. He walks slowly toward the great oak door. He moves past the rows of bunks, his hand occasionally reaching out to touch a wooden post or a stacked shield. The wood is warm, having absorbed the temperature of the room. The iron of the shields is cool, a reminder of the world outside. He reaches the door and places his palm against the wood. The cold is a physical shock, a sharp, vibrating energy that travels up his arm. He can feel the immense pressure of the snowdrifts piled against the exterior, a weight of thousands of pounds that is pressing the door firmly into its stone frame. The door is not just a portal, it is a dam, holding back the freezing ocean of the winter. He checks the wooden bolt, running his fingers over the polished grain. It is secure. He feels a deep, primitive satisfaction in the thickness of the oak and the strength of the iron. He then moves to the supply of firewood. There are only a few logs left in the primary pile, their bark craggy and gray in the low light. He selects a single, thick piece of birch, its white bark peeling away in thin, papery curls. He carries it back to the central brazier. He does not throw it onto the fire. He places it with the care of a jeweler setting a stone. He tucks it into a bed of glowing peat coals, watching as the heat immediately begins to char the edges of the white bark. A tiny blue flame erupts from a pocket of resin, dancing for a moment before turning into a steady, golden glow. The smell of the burning birch, sharp, sweet, and slightly medicinal, rises to meet him, providing the final layer of the night's sensory tapestry. This log will burn for 2 hours, carrying the room through the final transition into the morning. The air in the barrack is now perfectly still. The watchman returns to his stool and sits, his hands folded in his lap. He is no longer working. He is simply being. He is the witness to the final minutes of the night. He watches the way the amber light of the fire creates long, flickering corridors of shadow between the bunks. He watches the way the steam from the central cauldron, now a thick, stagnant cloud of nutty-smelling vapor, hangs motionless in the rafters. He listens to the rhythmic snoring of a man 3 bunks down, a low-frequency, vibrating sound that is as steady as the ticking of a clock. The man's breath creates a small, visible puff of mist in the cool air near his face, a tiny, personal cloud that appears and disappears with every cycle of his lungs. In this moment, the barrack feels like it is outside of time. It is a space that has existed forever and will exist forever. The smell of the wet wool is the scent of the human condition, the slow, laborious process of maintaining warmth in a cold universe. There is no drama here. There is no urgency. There is only the texture of the stone, the weight of the fabric, and the steady, unhurried passage of the minutes. The watchman feels his own eyelids growing heavy, the repetitive patterns of the shadows acting as a powerful sedative. He allows his head to tilt back slightly, his eyes half closing as he focuses on the sound of his own heart beating in his ears. It is a slow, steady thump-thump, a rhythmic counterpart to the breathing of the room. If you were lying in one of those bunks, you would feel an immense sense of gratitude for the boringness of the world. You would feel the weight of the fur blankets, the warmth of the dry wool against your skin, and the humid density of the air. You would know that the watchman is there, a silent silhouette in the amber light, and that he is maintaining the fire, the lamps, and the door. You would hear the scrape of his scraper, the plop of the cauldron, and the hush of the wind, and you would recognize these as the sounds of safety. The scent of the drying wool would be your final anchor, a deep, earthy perfume that tells your brain it is okay to sink even deeper into the darkness. There are no decisions to be made. There are no worries to be carried. There is only the night, the warmth, and the stone. The fire in the brazier settles with a soft, crumbling sound, a miniature mountain of ash collapsing to reveal a fresh, glowing heart of crimson. A single spark rises, dancing in a slow, erratic spiral toward the roof. It is a tiny, beautiful event that leaves no trace. The watchman watches it go, his mind as still as a frozen pond. The world is at rest. The barrack is at rest. The wool is dry and warm. You are drifting now, the boundaries of your consciousness dissolving into the heavy, humid atmosphere of the ancient room. The dawn is coming, but it is still far away. For now there is only this, the profound, hypnotic boringness of the winter barracks. Sleep is the only thing that remains. Sleep. The final hour of the night has arrived, a time of delicate transition where the heavy, velvet blackness of the barracks begins to yield to the first, tentative whispers of the winter dawn. Within these thick stone walls, The atmosphere has reached its absolute peak of cozy, monotonous perfection. The air is no longer a separate element that one breathes. It is a warm, humid blanket that has been woven over the course of 10 hours by the fire, the breath of the men, and the patient evaporation of moisture from 100 woolen garments. The scent of the wet wool, which began the night as a sharp, mineral-heavy intrusion, has completed its long transformation. It is now the scent of rested wool, a deep, earthy, and profoundly comforting aroma that speaks of total dryness. The lanolin has been softened by the persistent heat, coating the fibers and giving the air a tactile, almost creamy quality. It is a smell that signifies the successful navigation of the night, a sensory hallmark of a shelter that has fulfilled its ancient purpose. Let us observe the watchman in these final moments of his vigil. He is seated on his stool, his back against a massive oak pillar, his eyes fixed on the primary brazier. He is no longer moving. He has become part of the stillness. He watches the way the light in the room has begun to change. It is no longer a purely orange or amber glow. A thin, ethereal sliver of gray-blue light has begun to filter through the ventilation slits high above, where the frost lace has grown thickest. This new light is cold and sharp, but as it enters the humid interior of the barrack, it is immediately softened, turning into a pale, ghostly lavender as it mingles with the warm radiance of the embers. The light catches the microscopic dust motes that have been dancing in the air all night, illuminating them in long, vertical shafts that look like the strings of a giant, silent harp. The watchman watches a single mote as it drifts through a beam of blue light, then into the orange glow, then back into the shadow. Its journey is slow, erratic, and utterly peaceful. He reaches for the iron fire poker one last time. His hand moves with a glacial deliberation, the cool metal of the handle a familiar sensation against his skin. He gently nudges the remains of the birch log he added in the previous hour. The wood has been hollowed out by the heat, leaving behind a delicate, glowing skeleton of charcoal. As he touches it, the structure collapses with a soft, crystalline tink and a muffled hush, releasing a final, brilliant flurry of orange sparks. These sparks rise in a synchronized cloud, swirling upward on the thermal currents, their tiny lives winking out as they reach the dark rafters. The heat from the collapse radiates outward, a sudden, gentle pulse of warmth that the watchman feels on his face and chest. He does not add more fuel. The work of the fire is nearly done. The embers are now a solid, resonant bed of crimson, providing exactly enough warmth to carry the room through the final transition. The floor of the barrack, which has been a landscape of shadow and texture for so long, is now revealing its morning face. The rushes near the door are matted and dry, their herbal scent nearly exhausted, replaced by the clean, neutral smell of dust and stone. The flagstones are dark and polished, reflecting the blue light from above in cold, shimmering pools. In the corners of the room, the shadows are receding, unmasking the mundane details of the storage crates, the stacked shields, and the ceramic jars. Everything is exactly as it was when the night began, yet it feels different, hallowed by the passage of time and the shared silence of the community. The iron buckets, the leather straps, the wooden ladles, they all possess a quiet, inanimate dignity, having survived another night of the great winter. Let us consider the state of the wool. The cloaks and tunics hanging along the walls are now completely dry, They have lost the heavy, sodden drape of the evening and have regained their natural, springy volume. If you were to run your fingers through the weave of a cloak now, it would feel warm, not just on the surface, but deep within the fibers. The wool has trapped the heat of the barracks, acting as a thermal reservoir. The smell is no longer wet, it is warm. It is a scent that is uniquely human and uniquely ancient. The smell of a garment that has been lived in, worked in, and finally cared for. This smell is the ultimate sedative. It is the scent of a task completed. The wool is ready to be taken down, to be wrapped around shoulders, and to provide the first layer of defense against the frozen morning. In the bunks, the collective rhythm of the men's breathing has begun to shift. It is no longer the deep, oceanic roar of midnight. The inhalations are becoming slightly shallower, the exhalations more punctuated. Some of the men are stirring in that thin, gray layer of sleep that precedes awakening. A hand reaches out from beneath a bare fur blanket, fingers curling instinctively around the wooden edge of the bunk. A head shifts on a feather pillow, the sound a soft, papery wish. These movements are small, tentative, and unhurried. There is no alarm clock here, no sudden noise to shatter the peace. The awakening of the barrack is as slow as the rising of the sun. It is a gradual dawning of consciousness, a slow realization that the body is warm, the belly is soon to be full, and the walls are still standing. High above, the roof thatch is silent. The wind has fallen to a mere whisper, a low-frequency hum that is almost indistinguishable from the silence itself. The snow on the exterior has settled into a hard, crystalline crust, a white shell that protects the building from the morning's chill. Inside the thatch, the transition of heat continues. The moisture that was drawn from the wool throughout the night has found its way to the very top of the reeds, where it has frozen into a solid, insulating layer of rime. The barrack is now at its most stable. The architecture, the heat, the humidity, and the inhabitants are all in a state of perfect, boring harmony. The watchman rises from his stool. He moves to the water barrel and takes a final ladle of water. The sound is a crisp, liquid splash, a bright, clean note in the muffled air. He drinks slowly, the cold water a sharp contrast to the humid warmth of his lungs. He replaces the ladle with a soft clack. He then walks to the central cauldron, where the barley gruel has reached a state of thick, creamy perfection. He lifts the lid just an inch, allowing a fresh cloud of nutty, starchy steam to escape. The scent is the final signal of the night's end. It is the smell of the morning meal, the promise of energy and continuity. He lets the lid drop back into place with a dull, satisfying thud. The sound is not a disruption. It is a period at the end of a long, beautiful sentence. He walks to the great oak door and places his ear against the wood. He hears nothing but the vast, cold silence of the snowy landscape. The world outside is a monochrome study in white and blue, a frozen wilderness waiting for the first touch of the sun. But here inside, the world is amber and gray. He reaches for the heavy wooden bolt, his fingers tracing the smooth, polished grain. He does not slide it yet. He waits for the precise moment when the blue light from the window slits becomes bright enough to illuminate the floor across the entire length of the room. He stands there, a dark silhouette against the heavy timber, a guardian who has seen the night through to its conclusion. If you were lying in your bunk now, you would feel a profound sense of completeness. The journey through the night is over. You have been carried through the darkness by the strength of the stone, the warmth of the peat, and the heavy, humid protection of the wool. Your mind is clear, your body is rested, and your senses are saturated with the peaceful monotony of the barracks. The scent of the warm, dry wool is the last thing you hold onto, a grounding, ancient perfume that marks the boundary between the world of dreams and the world of the morning. You are safe. You are warm. You are part of the long, boring, beautiful history of the winter barracks. The fire is low, the light is growing, and the world is ready for the new day. But for now, for just one more minute, there is only the silence. There is only the warmth. There is only the peace. The watchman finally slides the bolt. The sound is a long, low, resonant thrum. The sound of wood sliding over wood, a deep, musical vibration that marks the end of the watch. He pulls the door open just a few inches. A single, thin blade of freezing, brilliant white light cuts through the amber gloom of the room, illuminating the dust motes and the stone floor in a sudden, breathtaking clarity. A puff of cold, fresh air enters, smelling of ice and pine, and it is immediately swallowed by the heavy warmth of the interior. The night is over. The dawn is here. The barracks are awake, and yet the stillness remains. The end.